The dust hung thick in the air as Gabriella Vance's screams echoed through the main street of Sierra Vista, Arizona. Her body bounced against the hard, packed earth, her wrists rubbed raw by the rope that bound her to the massive black stallion charging down the thoroughfare. It was 1878, and mercy was a luxury few could afford in this unforgiving territory, especially a woman accused of theft by one of the most ruthless men in the county. Zachary Keller had just emerged from the general store when the commotion erupted. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip, steel blue eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his weathered Stetson. He'd ridden into town only yesterday, seeking nothing more than supplies and perhaps a whiskey before continuing north. But the sight before him changed everything. "Stop that horse!" someone shouted, but the gathering crowd merely watched in horror as Emmett Radley, a man known for his cruelty and quick trigger finger, laughed atop his own mount, holding the lead rope that dragged the woman through the dusty street. Without hesitation, Zachary drew his knife and sprinted forward. He calculated the trajectory, muscles tensing as he waited for the precise moment. As the horse thundered past, he lunged, slashing the rope with one clean cut. The woman tumbled to a stop as Radley wheeled around, his face contorted with rage. "You got a death wish, stranger," Radley snarled, his hand moving to his gun. Zachary was faster. His Colt cleared leather in one fluid motion, the report of the shot drowning out the gasps of the onlookers. Radley's expression shifted from rage to surprise as crimson bloomed across his chest. He toppled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. Silence fell over Sierra Vista. Zachary holstered his weapon and turned to the woman who lay motionless in the street, her once blue dress now torn and covered in dust. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, and blood trickled from numerous scrapes and cuts across her exposed skin. He knelt beside her, gently touching her shoulder. "Miss, can you hear me?" Gabriella's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of whiskey. Fear flashed across her face before giving way to confusion. You killed him." "I did what needed doing," Zachary replied, his voice low and steady. "Can you stand?" The incident that would forever alter both their lives had lasted mere seconds. But as Zachary helped Gabriella to her feet, neither could have predicted the tumultuous journey that lay ahead, a path paved with danger, redemption, and an unexpected love that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the harsh land they called home. "My name's Zachary Keller," he said as he supported her weight, "and I reckon you and I need to get out of town before the sheriff comes asking questions." "Gabriella Vance," she whispered, wincing with pain as she attempted to stand. "And I believe you're right, Mr. Keller." The crowd parted as Zachary led her toward his horse, a magnificent palomino that stood patiently at the hitching post. Behind them, shouts began as someone finally went to fetch the sheriff. Whatever peace Sierra Vista had known that morning was now shattered, leaving two strangers bound by circumstance and the unavoidable consequences of a single, fateful moment. Zachary helped Gabriella onto his horse before swinging up behind her. She was trembling, whether from shock or pain, he couldn't tell. Without a backward glance, he urged his mount forward, leaving the gathered townsfolk and the body of Emmett Radley behind. "Where are we going?" Gabriella asked, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic pounding of the horse's hooves. "My camp's about 2 miles outside of town," Zachary replied. "We'll get you patched up, then figure out what comes next." They rode in silence, the Arizona landscape sprawling before them in hues of amber and rust. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as they approached a small stand of cottonwood trees near a shallow creek, an oasis in the otherwise barren terrain. Zachary's camp was simple but well organized. A small tent, a fire pit ringed with stones, and various supplies neatly arranged beneath a canvas tarp. He helped Gabriella dismount, guiding her to sit on his bedroll while he tended to his horse. "I need to know what happened back there," he said as he unsaddled the Palomino. "Why was Radley dragging you through town?" Gabriella winced as she examined the raw skin of her wrists. "He accused me of stealing from his ranch, said he caught me taking money from his safe. And did you?" Her eyes flashed with indignation. "I worked as his housekeeper for 6 months. I never took a penny that wasn't mine." Her voice grew quieter, "but I saw things, heard things I shouldn't have. Radley was involved in something dangerous. When I tried to leave his employ, he claimed I'd stolen from him." Zachary nodded, retrieving a canteen and a small tin of salve from his saddlebags. He knelt before her, dampening a clean bandana with water. "This will sting," he warned before gently cleaning the abrasions on her face and hands. Gabriella bit her lip but remained stoic as he worked. "What kind of dangerous things?" Cattle rustling, for starters. But there was more. "He had meetings with men I didn't recognize. They spoke of shipments, routes." She shook her head. "I didn't understand most of it, but I knew it wasn't honest work." Zachary's expression darkened as he applied the salve to her wounds. "Radley had connections throughout the territory. If what you're saying is true, his associates won't take kindly to his death." "You saved my life," Gabriella said quietly, "but now yours is in danger because of me." A ghost of a smile touched Zachary's lips. "Wouldn't be the first time I've had men after me." He secured a bandage around her worst wrist abrasion. "Though I admit, I wasn't planning on making enemies so quickly in Sierra Vista." As dusk fell, Zachary built a small fire and prepared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. Gabriella had remained silent, lost in thought as she stared into the flames. The flickering light illuminated the bruises forming on her cheekbones and the hollowness beneath her eyes. "Where are you from, Miss Vance?" Zachary asked, passing her a tin cup of hot coffee. "Please call me Gabriella." She accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "I'm from Boston originally. My parents died of fever 3 years ago. I came west hoping for a new beginning." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I've not had much luck finding it." Zachary studied her over the rim of his cup. Despite her injuries and disheveled appearance, there was a quiet dignity about her. Her posture remained straight, her chin lifted with determination rather than defiance. "And you, Mr. Keller, what brings you to Arizona?" "Zachary," he corrected. "I've been drifting for some years now. Was a rancher up in Wyoming territory until the winter of '74. Something dark passed over his features. Lost everything in the blizzards that year, been moving ever since." "I'm sorry," Gabriella murmured. He shrugged. "It was a lifetime ago." He set his empty cup aside. "You should rest. We'll need to move at first light. Once word spreads of what happened, Sierra Vista won't be safe for either of us." "Where will we go?" "I have a friend who owns a ranch about 3 days' ride from here. Nathan Holbrook. He's a good man, might be willing to give us shelter until we figure things out." Gabriella nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Zachary offered her his tent while he prepared to sleep beneath the stars, but she hesitated. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ridden on, kept out of trouble. You didn't know me." Zachary paused, looking up at the emerging stars. "Some things a man can't ride past, no matter how much simpler it might make his life." His eyes met hers. "Get some rest, Gabriella. Tomorrow will come soon enough." As she disappeared into the small tent, Zachary settled himself beside the fire, his rifle within easy reach. He didn't expect trouble tonight, but experience had taught him the value of caution. The day's events replayed in his mind: the woman's screams, Radley's mocking laughter, the weight of the Colt in his hand. He'd killed men before, but never so publicly, never with such certainty that there would be consequences. He glanced toward the tent where Gabriella slept. Something about her story didn't quite add up, but he couldn't deny the genuine fear in her eyes when she spoke of Radley. Whatever secrets she carried, Zachary had made his choice the moment he cut that rope. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined. Dawn arrived with a chill that quickly surrendered to the relentless Arizona sun. Zachary had been up before first light, packing their meager supplies and saddling his horse. When Gabriella emerged from the tent, he noted with approval that despite her injuries, she moved with purpose, helping to break camp without being asked. "How are you feeling?" he inquired, handing her a piece of hardtack and some jerky. "I've been better," she admitted, wincing as she stretched her arms. "But I'll manage." Zachary nodded, appreciating her resilience. "We've got a long ride ahead. Nathan's place is near Tucson, but we'll need to avoid the main trails. Radley's friends will be looking for us." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, Gabriella riding behind Zachary. The Palomino Ajax, she'd learned he was called, was strong but would tire faster carrying double. They'd need to acquire another horse at some point, but for now, this arrangement would have to do. As they rode, Gabriella gradually shared more of her story. After her parents' deaths, she discovered that their modest estate was riddled with debt. With few options available to a single woman of 22, she'd sold what remained of their possessions and purchased passage west, drawn by advertisements promising opportunities for educated women to serve as teachers or companions. "When I arrived in Santa Fe, I quickly learned those promises were mostly hollow," she explained, her voice raised to be heard over the steady rhythm of Ajax's hooves. "I found work where I could: cooking, cleaning, mending. Eventually, I made my way to Sierra Vista. Radley offered decent wages for a housekeeper. And you had no idea what he was involved in when you took the position." She shook her head, though Zachary couldn't see the gesture. "He seemed respectable enough at first. It was only after a few months that I began to notice discrepancies. Strange men visiting at odd hours. Conversations that ceased the moment I entered a room." "What made you decide to leave?" Gabriella hesitated, her hands tightening around Zachary's waist. 3 weeks ago, I overheard Radley and a man named Fletcher discussing a plan to ambush a military convoy carrying payroll. They mentioned bribing someone at Fort Huachuca for information. When they realized I might have heard, Radley's manner toward me changed. He became threatening." Zachary digested this information in silence. If Radley had been planning to rob a military payroll, this situation was far more complicated than he'd initially thought. "Did you recognize any of the other men involved?" he asked finally. "Only by name. Fletcher seemed to be in charge." "There was mention of someone called Blackburn and a Morgan. I believe Morgan may have been their contact at the fort." They paused at midday beside a small arroyo, seeking shelter from the sun beneath an overhang of rock. Zachary shared their water sparingly. They would need to find more before nightfall. "If what you heard was true, we're dealing with dangerous men," he said, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "Men who won't hesitate to silence anyone who might expose their plans." Gabriella met his gaze steadily. "I understand if you want to part ways, Zachary. You've already done more than most would." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "A bit late for that, don't you think? I already shot one of them." He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "Besides, Nathan served with the army before settling down. He might have connections that could help us get this information to the right people." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they moved southeast. The sparse vegetation of the higher desert gave way to stretches of grassland interspersed with mesquite and prickly pear. Zachary kept them away from established trails, relying on his knowledge of the territory to find safe passage. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, they approached a small homestead nestled in a shallow valley. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney of a modest adobe structure. A corral beside it held several horses, and a small garden plot showed signs of careful tending. "We'll stop here for the night," Zachary decided. "I know the family. They're good people." Gabriella's apprehension must have shown on her face, for he added, "Thomas and Martha Quinn mind their own business. They won't ask questions we don't want to answer." The Quinns proved to be exactly as Zachary had described, a weathered but kind couple who welcomed them without prying. Thomas, a former trapper turned small-scale rancher, offered them use of a spare room while Martha tended to Gabriella's injuries with a gentle touch, and prepared a hearty stew that reminded Gabriella how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal. After supper, while the women cleaned up, Thomas led Zachary outside to the porch. The two men shared a smoke in companionable silence before Thomas spoke. "Trouble follows you like a shadow, Zach," he observed, his voice carrying no judgment. "That woman's running from something fierce." Zachary exhaled a stream of smoke. "We both are. Man named Radley was dragging her through Sierra Vista. I stepped in." Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken. "Word travels. Heard about a shooting there yesterday." He tapped ash from his pipe. "Radley had friends in dark places." "I figured as much. We're headed to Nathan Holbrook's place." "Smart. Nathan's got pull with the territorial marshal." Thomas glanced toward the house. "She worth the risk, Zach?" Zachary considered the question, watching as Gabriella's silhouette moved behind the curtained window. "Don't rightly know yet, but no one deserves what was happening to her." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Your daddy raised you right, whatever else might be said." He stood. "Get some rest. Martha's packed provisions for you both. You'll want an early start." Inside, Martha had prepared a pallet for Zachary near the hearth while Gabriella was given the small guest room. As Gabriella bid them good night, her eyes met Zachary's briefly, conveying a wordless gratitude that stirred something unexpected within him. Later, as he lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of a household settling for the night, Zachary found himself thinking of Wyoming, of the ranch he'd built with his own hands, the cattle he'd tended through summer heat and winter blizzards, of Emily, his wife of barely a year, who had succumbed to the cold during that terrible winter when supplies ran short and medical help was miles away across impassable terrain. He'd buried her beneath a cottonwood tree, marking the grave with a cross fashioned from fence posts. By spring, when the snow finally melted, he'd sold what remained of his herd, packed his few possessions, and ridden south, leaving behind the land and the dreams that had once defined him. 4 years of drifting had taught him to avoid attachments, to keep moving before roots could take hold. Yet here he was, risking his life for a woman he barely knew, making plans that extended beyond the next sunset. It was a dangerous path, not just because of Radley's associates, but because it threatened the careful emptiness he'd cultivated since Emily's death. Dawn found him already awake, his few possessions packed. Martha pressed a bundle of food into his hands while Thomas offered ammunition for his rifle and pistol. The older couple stood on their porch as Zachary and Gabriella mounted Ajax, waving until the riders disappeared over the ridge. "They seem like family to you," Gabriella observed as they established a steady pace. "Thomas saved my life once, years back, Mountain lion had me cornered in a ravine. He tracked it and put a bullet through its skull just as it was about to pounce. Zachary adjusted his hat against the rising sun. Kind of debt that doesn't expire. The day passed without incident as they traveled across increasingly verdant terrain. Water was more plentiful here, with seasonal streams cutting through the landscape. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising rain. "We should find shelter," Zachary said, eyeing the advancing storm. "Flash floods are common in these parts." They veered toward a rocky outcropping that offered some protection from the elements. Barely had they secured Ajax and gathered firewood when the first heavy drops began to fall. The rain quickly intensified, transforming the dusty ground into mud and sending rivulets cascading down the rocks above their shelter. Huddled beneath the overhang, Zachary struggled to light a fire with the damp tinder. Gabriella knelt beside him, shielding the nascent flame with her body until it caught, gradually growing into a small but steady blaze. "You've done this before," Zachary observed, impressed by her practical skill. "My father believed in raising capable children, regardless of gender," she replied, settling back against the rock wall. "He taught me to ride, shoot, and survive outdoors before I was 12. The rain continued unabated, drumming against the earth with such intensity that conversation became difficult. They ate a cold supper of bread and dried meat, sharing the canteen sparingly. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and Gabriella moved closer to the fire, drawing her knees to her chest. Without comment, Zachary removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. When she began to protest, he silenced her with a raised hand. "I'm used to the cold," he said simply. "Wyoming winters make this feel like a summer breeze." She accepted the gesture with a nod, pulling the coat tighter around herself. It carried his scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely him that she couldn't quite identify. "Tell me about Wyoming," she requested, seeking distraction from the storm and their precarious situation. Zachary's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes changed, a flicker of pain quickly suppressed. "Not much to tell. It's beautiful country, harsh but honest. You had a ranch there, a small spread, nothing grand, good water, decent grazing." He poked at the fire with a stick. "About 40 head of cattle, 6 horses. What happened?" The stick snapped between his fingers. "Winter of '74 happened, worst blizzards in living memory. Lost most of my herd. Lost more than that." The finality in his tone made it clear that the subject was closed. Gabriella respected his reticence, turning her attention back to the fire. After a long silence, broken only by the persistent rain, Zachary spoke again, his voice so low she almost missed his words. "Her name was Emily." Gabriella remained still, afraid that any movement might cause him to retreat back into silence. "We'd been married 11 months when the blizzards hit. She caught a fever. I couldn't get her to a doctor." His jaw tightened. "I buried her when the ground was frozen so hard it took me 3 days to dig deep enough." "I'm sorry," Gabriella whispered, understanding all too well the hollow ache of loss. "It was a long time ago," he said, though his expression belied the casual dismissal. A particularly loud crack of thunder startled them both. Ajax whinnied nervously from his shelter beneath a nearby ledge, and Zachary rose to check on the horse. When he returned, soaked from the brief exposure to the elements, Gabriella had spread his bedroll near the fire. "You should rest," she said. "I'll keep watch for a while." He hesitated, then nodded, lowering himself onto the bedroll. "Wake me in a few hours. Storm should pass by morning." Gabriella watched as his breathing gradually deepened, the hard lines of his face softening in sleep. In repose, he looked younger. the weight of whatever demons pursued him temporarily lifted. She found herself wondering about the man he had been before loss and hardship had shaped him into the guarded drifter who had, against all odds, become her protector. As promised, the storm abated by dawn, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The desert seemed to have awakened overnight, with tiny wildflowers already beginning to push through the dampened earth. They packed quickly and continued their journey, making good time on ground that was firmer now that the initial deluge had been absorbed. By midday, they spotted a small trading post nestled at a crossroads. A handful of horses were hitched outside, and smoke rose from the chimney. "We need supplies," Zachary decided, "and information, but it's risky." "I'll stay with the horse," Gabriella offered. "If anyone's looking for us, they'll be watching for a man and woman traveling together." Zachary considered this, then shook his head. "If anyone's hunting us, they'll check isolated homesteads and trading posts like this. Better to go in together, pretend we're husband and wife passing through." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a simple gold band. "This was Emily's," he explained, his voice carefully neutral. "Wear it. If anyone asks, we're the Taylors, headed to visit family in Tucson." Gabriella accepted the ring with appropriate solemnity, understanding both the practical necessity and the significant trust Zachary was placing in her by allowing her to wear his dead wife's wedding band. She slipped it onto her finger, surprised to find it fit reasonably well. The trading post was crowded with an assortment of travelers, ranchers, and local residents seeking supplies and news. Zachary kept a protective hand at Gabriella's elbow as they navigated the cramped interior, gathering coffee, ammunition, dried goods, and a new canteen. The proprietor, a grizzled man with one eye and a network of scars across his face, watched them with mild interest. "You folks just passing through?" he inquired as he tallied their purchases. "Heading to Tucson," Zachary replied easily. "My wife's brother just had his first child." The man grunted. "Road's been troublesome lately. Heard tell of bandits operating between here and there." "Appreciate the warning," Zachary said, counting out coins from a leather pouch. "Any news worth knowing?" The proprietor leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Marshall's got a posse out looking for the man who shot Emmett Radley over in Sierra Vista. Apparently, he kidnapped a woman afterward." Gabriella felt her heart rate quicken but maintained a neutral expression as she examined a bolt of calico fabric. "That's so." Zachary's tone conveyed only mild curiosity. "Radley had a reputation. Might be there's more to the story." The man shrugged. "Ain't my business to speculate. Just passing along what I heard. Reward's substantial, though. $500 for information leading to their capture." "Dead or alive?" Zachary asked, his voice still casual. "Didn't specify. But knowing Radley's friends, I reckon they don't much care about the condition." He wrapped their purchases in brown paper. "You might want to consider an alternate route to Tucson. Patrols are heavy on the main road." They thanked him for the advice and exited the trading post, maintaining their unhurried pace until they were out of sight. Once back in the saddle, Zachary urged Ajax to a faster clip, taking a game trail that led away from the established roads. $500, Gabriella said once they were safely distant. "That's a fortune." "It is," Zachary agreed grimly. "Which means we've got every bounty hunter and opportunist in the territory looking for us now, not just Radley's associates." They pushed hard through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to water the horse and eat a quick meal. Zachary remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. As dusk approached, they came upon a dilapidated line shack, a simple one-room structure used by cowhands during roundups. "We'll stay here tonight," Zachary decided after inspecting the building. It's not much, but it's defensible and it'll keep us out of sight. The shack was dusty but intact, with a small iron stove, a rickety table, and a narrow cot with a straw-filled mattress. While Gabriella swept the dirt floor and arranged their supplies, Zachary tended to Ajax and gathered firewood. By the time darkness fell, they had established a reasonably comfortable camp. Gabriella prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, supplemented with the last of Martha Quinn's biscuits. As they ate, she found herself studying Zachary's profile in the flickering lantern light. Despite their dire circumstances, she felt safer in his presence than she had in months. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet competence that inspired confidence. "You think we'll reach Nathan's ranch tomorrow?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence. "If we start at first light and don't encounter trouble, we should arrive by nightfall," Zachary replied. "His place is near the foothills, about 10 miles outside Tucson proper." "And you're certain he'll help us?" Zachary set his plate aside. "Nathan and I served together during the war. He was my lieutenant in the 4th Cavalry. After, when I headed to Wyoming, he came west to Arizona. We've stayed in touch over the years." A faint smile touched his lips. "He's a good man, stubborn as a mule but loyal to a fault." Gabriella twisted Emily's ring on her finger, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Zachary. "I should return this to you," she said, beginning to remove it. "Keep it for now," he replied. "At least until we reach Nathan's. Safer if we maintain the appearance of being married." The practical explanation made sense, but Gabriella couldn't help wondering if there was more to his reluctance to take back the ring. Perhaps it was easier to see it on someone else's hand than to hold it again himself, to be reminded of all he had lost. The cot was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Without discussion, Zachary spread his bedroll on the floor beside it. "Take the cot," he said when Gabriella began to protest. "I've slept on worse." She wanted to argue but recognized the stubbornness in his expression. Instead, she settled onto the thin mattress, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. Zachary extinguished the lantern before stretching out on his bedroll, his rifle within easy reach. In the darkness, the small shack seemed even more intimate. Gabriella could hear the steady rhythm of Zachary's breathing, could almost feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the space between them. It had been a long time since she had been this close to a man, let alone one who had risked everything to save her. The realization brought with it a confusion of emotions, gratitude, certainly, but also something more complicated, more dangerous. "Zachary," she whispered, uncertain if he was still awake. His voice was low in the darkness. "Thank you, not just for saving my life, but for believing me. For helping me when you could have walked away." There was a long pause before he replied. "Get some rest, Gabriella. Tomorrow will be another long day." Despite his words, neither of them fell asleep immediately. Gabriella lay awake, listening to the night sounds, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant yip of coyotes, the occasional shift of Ajax outside. Her mind replayed the events that had brought her to this moment, from her arrival in the West full of naive hopes to the terror of being dragged behind Radley's horse. Sometime later, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by a nightmare, the sensation of rope burning her wrists, of her body being dragged across rough ground. She gasped, sitting upright on the cot. "Gabriella." Zachary's voice came immediately, alert despite the hour. "What is it?" "Just a dream," she managed, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry I woke you." She heard him shift, then felt the cot dip as he sat beside her. In the faint moonlight filtering through the single window, she could just make out his silhouette. "It'll get easier," he said quietly. The memories, They don't disappear, but they fade, become manageable. Without thinking, Gabriella reached for his hand in the darkness. His fingers were calloused, warm against her cooler skin. For a moment, neither of them moved, the simple human contact a comfort more powerful than words. Then, as if realizing the impropriety, Zachary gently withdrew his hand and stood. "Try to sleep. I'll keep watch for a while." She lay back down, the lingering warmth of his touch following her back into slumber. They departed the lined shack before dawn, packing quickly in the gray pre-dawn light. The day promised to be hot, with clear skies and a sun that would soon beat down mercilessly upon them. Zachary set a brisk pace, alternating between trotting and walking to avoid overtaxing Ajax, who still carried double. As the morning progressed, the terrain began to change, becoming more varied. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, with stands of mesquite and oak providing occasional shade. In the distance, mountains rose blue and hazy against the horizon. "Catalina's," Zachary explained, following Gabriella's gaze. "Nathan's ranch is in their foothills. Good water there and milder temperatures." They paused at midday beside a small spring, allowing Ajax to drink deeply while they refilled their canteens. As Gabriella splashed water on her face, she caught a flicker of movement on the ridge behind them. "Zachary," she said softly, not turning. "Someone's watching us." He continued filling the canteen, his movements unhurried. "I see them, at least 2 riders on the ridge. They've been paralleling our trail for the last hour." Fear tightened Gabriella's throat. Radley's men, possibly, or bounty hunters. Zachary straightened, casually checking his pistol as he scanned the horizon. "Either way, we can't outrun them on one horse. We need to find cover, make a stand if necessary." He helped her mount Ajax, then swung up behind her. Instead of continuing along the open trail, he guided the horse into a narrow arroyo, following its winding course between rock walls that offered some protection from observation. "There's an abandoned homestead about 2 miles ahead," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Stone walls, defensible position. If we can reach it before they cut us off, we might stand a chance." The arroyo eventually widened, opening onto a small valley dotted with scrub brush and boulders. Across the open ground, perhaps half a mile distant, stood the remnants of a stone cabin. The roof had partially collapsed, but the walls appeared solid. "That's it," Zachary confirmed. "It's going to be a sprint from here. Hold tight." He urged Ajax into a gallop, the horse responding valiantly despite his fatigue. They were halfway across the open ground when the first shot rang out, the bullet kicking up dust yards to their right. "Keep down," Zachary shouted, hunching lower in the saddle and pulling Gabriella against his chest. Ajax ran as if the devil himself were at his heels, sensing the danger as more shots followed, each closer than the last. They reached the cabin as a bullet splintered the wooden door frame. Zachary practically threw Gabriella from the saddle, pushing her through the doorway before leaping down himself. He slapped Ajax on the flank, sending the horse running for the safety of a nearby stand of trees, then dove into the cabin as another shot ricocheted off the stone wall. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of abandonment. Partial sunlight filtered through the damaged roof, illuminating a space that had once been someone's home. A collapsed table lay in one corner, and the remnants of a bed frame stood against the far wall. Broken crockery littered the dirt floor. Zachary moved to one of the windows, its glass long since shattered, and peered cautiously outside. "4 of them," he reported grimly. "They've split up, trying to surround us." Gabriella joined him at the window, staying low. The riders had dismounted and were using the terrain for cover as they advanced toward the cabin. One man, tall and lean with a shock of white blonde hair, seemed to be directing the others. "That's Fletcher," she whispered, recognition dawning. "The man who was planning the payroll robbery with Radley." Zachary's expression hardened. "Makes sense. With Radley dead, he'd want to tie up loose ends, namely you." He checked his rifle, then handed Gabriella his Colt. "Can you use this?" "Yes." She took the weapon, its weight familiar in her hand. "My father believed a woman should know how to defend herself." A brief smile touched his lips. "Good man, your father." The smile vanished as he turned serious again. "Stay low, conserve ammunition. If they rush us, aim for the center of the body. Don't try for fancy shots. What about you? I'll try to thin their numbers before they get too close." He moved to another window, positioning his rifle. "With luck, they'll decide we're not worth the trouble." The next hour passed in tense silence, punctuated by occasional exchanges of gunfire. Zachary managed to wound one of the attackers, sending him crawling back to the cover of the rocks. The others became more cautious, settling in for what appeared to be a siege. As the afternoon wore on, the heat inside the cabin became stifling. Their water supply was limited, and Zachary rationed it carefully, allowing them each only small sips. Sweat trickled down Gabriella's spine as she maintained her vigil at the window, watching for any movement among the rocks and scrub. "They're waiting for dark," Zachary said eventually, his voice low. "They'll try to rush us then when visibility is poor. What do we do?" He considered for a moment. "We need to change the equation, give them something they don't expect." Before he could elaborate, a voice called out from beyond the rocks. "Keller, we know you're in there with the Vance woman." Zachary and Gabriella exchanged startled glances. "Their pursuers shouldn't have known their names." "That information comes at a premium, Fletcher," Zachary called back, his voice steady despite the implications. "How'd you come by it?" Fletcher's laugh carried across the distance. "You think you're the only one with friends, Keller. Word travels. Especially when there's $500 on your head." "Let the woman go," Zachary countered. "Your quarrel's with me now." "Afraid that's not possible. She heard things she shouldn't have. Radley was a fool to let it get this far, but here we are." A pause. "Come out now, both of you, hands empty, and I promise it'll be quick. Or we can wait until dark and do this the hard way." Gabriella's hand found Zachary's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "They're going to kill us no matter what," she whispered. He nodded, his eyes never leaving the terrain beyond the cabin. "Which is why we're not surrendering." He glanced upward, where the afternoon sun still illuminated the damaged roof. "I need you to create a distraction. When I give the signal, fire 2 shots through that western window, then 2 more through the north one. Don't expose yourself." "What are you going to do?" "Something stupid," he admitted with a grim smile. "But it might just work." While Fletcher continued to call out increasingly impatient demands, Zachary moved silently to the rear of the cabin. A portion of the wall had crumbled, leaving a gap barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He checked his ammunition, then met Gabriella's worried gaze. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "run for the trees where Ajax went. Keep heading northeast. You'll reach Nathan's place eventually." Before she could respond, he pressed his lips to hers in a brief, fierce kiss that left her stunned. Then he was gone, slipping through the gap and disappearing from view. Gabriella touched her fingers to her lips, the unexpected kiss leaving her momentarily bewildered. Then, recognizing her responsibility, she positioned herself where she could cover both windows. Long minutes passed with no signal from Zachary. Fletcher had fallen silent, apparently realizing that further negotiation was pointless. Just as the tension became nearly unbearable, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Zachary's signal. Gabriella immediately fired twice through the western window, then swiftly moved to the north one and repeated the action. The reports echoed across the valley, drawing immediate return fire from Fletcher and his men. While they focused their attention on the cabin, Zachary made his move. He had circled around, using the natural contours of the land for cover, and now approached their position from behind. The first man never knew what hit him. A rock to the back of the head dropped him unconscious. The second turned at the sound of his companion falling, only to receive a crushing blow to the jaw from Zachary's fist. Fletcher and the remaining gunmen realized the trap too late. They whirled to face this new threat, but Zachary was already firing. The fourth man fell with a bullet in his shoulder, screaming in pain. Fletcher managed to get off a shot that grazed Zachary's arm before the rifle butt connected with his temple, sending him sprawling. From the cabin, Gabriella watched in amazement as the gunfire suddenly ceased. Heart pounding, she kept the Colt trained on the area where she'd last seen movement. Then Zachary's voice called out, "It's clear, Gabriella. You can come out." Still cautious, she emerged from the cabin to find Zachary binding Fletcher's hands with the man's own belt. The other three attackers were similarly restrained, two unconscious and one moaning from his shoulder wound. "Are you hurt?" she asked, noticing the blood staining Zachary's sleeve. "Just a graze," he assured her, though the tightness around his eyes suggested more pain than he admitted. "We need to move quickly. There might be more of them." With Fletcher and his men secured and relieved of their weapons, Zachary whistled for Ajax. The faithful horse emerged from the trees, approaching cautiously. Zachary quickly gathered their scattered belongings and helped Gabriella mount. "What about them?" she asked, gesturing toward the bound men. "We'll take their horses, leave them with enough water to survive until someone comes along." His expression was hard as he regarded Fletcher, who was beginning to regain consciousness. "Which may be a while, given how far off the main trail we are." They collected the attackers' 4 horses, appropriating one for Gabriella to ride. After ensuring the men had water within reach, an act of mercy that Fletcher certainly wouldn't have extended to them, they set off, leaving the abandoned homestead behind. With fresh mounts, they made good time as the afternoon waned. Zachary was quieter than usual, the wound in his arm clearly causing him discomfort despite his attempts to minimize it. When Gabriella suggested stopping to tend to it properly, he refused. "We need distance," he insisted. "Nathan's place isn't far now." As twilight descended, they crested a rise to see a valley spread before them. A substantial ranch house stood near a creek, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and a large corral held numerous horses. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the enticing scent of a cooking meal. "That's it," Zachary said, relief evident in his voice. "Holbrook Ranch." They approached at a walk, both too weary for any greater speed. A dog began barking as they neared, alerting the household to visitors. The front door opened, and a tall figure holding a rifle stepped onto the porch. "Who rides?" a deep voice called. "Zachary Keller and companion," Zachary replied. "Looking for shelter, Nathan, if you can spare it." The rifle lowered immediately. "Zach, by God, is that really you?" Nathan Holbrook descended the steps as they dismounted. He was a large man, broad-shouldered with a thick brown beard flecked with gray. His handshake was firm as he greeted Zachary, then turned curious eyes to Gabriella. "Nathan, this is Gabriella Vance," Zachary introduced her. "Gabriella, Nathan Holbrook." "Madam," Nathan nodded respectfully, "any friend of Zach's is welcome here." His expression grew concerned as he noted Zachary's blood-stained sleeve. "Looks like you've had trouble." "Some," Zachary admitted. "It's a long story." "Most of yours are," Nathan replied with a wry smile. "Come inside. Rebecca will have dinner waiting, and it looks like you both could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest." The interior of the ranch house was spacious and comfortable, with solid furniture and colorful woven rugs covering the plank floors. Rebecca Holbrook, a handsome woman with kind eyes and graying auburn hair, welcomed them warmly, immediately noticing Zachary's injury. "Nathan, show them to the guest rooms while I heat water," she instructed. "Then bring Mr. Keller to the kitchen so I can tend that wound." While Nathan led them upstairs, Rebecca's efficient movements reminded Gabriella of her own mother, practical, no nonsense, yet deeply caring. The thought brought an unexpected pang of homesickness. The guest room assigned to Gabriella was small but well appointed, with a real feather mattress on the bed and clean linens. A pitcher and basin stood on a washstand, and a looking glass hung on the wall, small luxuries that seemed extravagant after days on the trail. Left alone, Gabriella washed away the dust of travel as best she could, then changed into a clean shirt that Rebecca had provided. It was far too large, clearly belonging to one of the Holbrook sons, but it was blessedly free of trail grime. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Zachary seated at the table, his shirt removed while Rebecca cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on his upper arm. Nathan stood nearby, his expression grave as Zachary related a condensed version of their recent adventures. "So we left Fletcher and his men tied up at the abandoned Pearson place," Zachary was saying. "They'll eventually free themselves or someone will find them." Nathan shook his head. "Fletcher's been suspected of rustling and worse for years, but no one's been able to pin anything on him. If what Miss Vance overheard is true, they were planning something big with that payroll robbery." "The convoy is scheduled for next week," Gabriella said, entering the conversation as she took a seat at the table. "That's what I heard them say." Rebecca finished bandaging Zachary's arm and began setting out plates for dinner. "You both need food and rest before you decide anything," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. "The territorial marshal is a friend of ours. He'll be passing through tomorrow on his way to Tucson. You can speak with him then." The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Gabriella hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was placed before her. She ate with enthusiasm, noting that Zachary did the same, though he remained vigilant, his eyes frequently moving to the windows. After dinner, Nathan brought out a bottle of whiskey, pouring small measures for himself and Zachary. The men moved to the porch, while Rebecca invited Gabriella to help with the dishes, a transparent excuse to speak privately. "How long have you known Zachary?" Rebecca asked as they worked side by side. "Only a few days," Gabriella admitted, "since he saved me from Radley." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "He's a good man. Nathan served with him during the war, says he never met anyone braver or more loyal." She glanced toward the porch, where the men's silhouettes were visible through the window. "He's been through a great deal of hardship." "He mentioned his wife," Gabriella said softly, "and losing his ranch. Emily's death nearly destroyed him. Nathan worried for years that Zach would get himself killed, the risks he was taking." Rebecca's eyes were kind as they met Gabriella's. "This is the first time he's brought anyone to the ranch. That says something significant." Before Gabriella could respond to this observation, the men returned inside. Zachary looked more relaxed than she had yet seen him, the whiskey and the security of friendly surroundings having eased some of the tension from his bearing. "I've asked Nathan to send one of his hands to Fort Huachuca tomorrow," he explained, "with a message for the commanding officer about the planned payroll robbery. Meanwhile, we'll speak with Marshal Davis when he arrives." And then, Gabriella asked, the question encompassing all the uncertainties that lay ahead. Zachary's gaze held her steadily. Then we clear your name and mine. After that. He hesitated. After that, you'll be free to go wherever you choose. The implication that they would part ways once the immediate danger had passed brought an unexpected hollowness to Gabriella's chest. In the few days they had traveled together, she had come to rely on Zachary's presence, his steadfast protection. The prospect of continuing alone seemed suddenly daunting. Rebecca, observing the exchange with perceptive eyes, intervened tactfully. You both look exhausted. Why don't you get some rest? Things often appear clearer in the morning light. Upstairs, Zachary paused outside Gabriella's door. Lock this behind me, he instructed. I don't anticipate trouble, but habits of caution die hard. Where will you be? Across the hall. He gestured to another door. Close enough if you need anything. An awkward silence fell between them, both remembering the desperate kiss at the abandoned cabin, a moment neither had mentioned since. Gabriella twisted Emily's ring, which still adorned her finger. I should return this to you, she said, beginning to remove it. Zachary's hand closed gently over hers, stilling the motion. Keep it for now, he said quietly, until this is finished. His touch lingered a moment longer than necessary before he withdrew, bidding her good night with a nod. Gabriella watched him cross to his own room, then entered hers, securing the lock as instructed. Despite the comfortable bed and the safety of the Holbrook Ranch, sleep proved elusive. Her mind replayed the events of the past days, the terror of being dragged behind Radley's horse, the shock of witnessing Zachary shoot him, the desperate flight from Fletcher and his men. And beneath these dramatic moments lay subtler ones, the gentle way Zachary had tended her injuries, the warmth of his body behind hers as they rode, the unexpected tenderness of his kiss when he thought they might not survive the afternoon. These memories stirred emotions she had not expected to feel again after the disappointments that had marked her journey west. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee and bacon drifting up from the kitchen below. Gabriella, dressed in clothes Rebecca had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that had belonged to her daughter, now married and living in California. They were slightly large but far more suitable than the men's shirts she had been wearing. Downstairs, she found Nathan and Zachary in conversation with a third man, tall, lean, with iron-gray hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. He wore a badge on his vest that identified him as the territorial marshal. Miss Vance, Nathan greeted her. This is Marshal James Davis. He's interested in hearing your account of what you overheard at Radley's ranch. The marshal's handshake was firm, his assessment direct but not unkind. Mr. Keller has given me his version of events, he said. I'd appreciate hearing yours, particularly regarding the planned robbery. Over breakfast, Gabriella recounted everything she could remember about the conversations between Radley and Fletcher. The marshal listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. This corroborates information we've received from other sources, he said when she had finished. We've suspected Fletcher's involvement in several robberies, but proof has been elusive. What about the charges against us? Zachary asked. Radley's killing was self-defense and the kidnapping accusation is false. Marshal Davis nodded. With Miss Vance's testimony and the evidence against Fletcher's gang, I believe those charges can be dismissed. However, he hesitated. There's still the matter of the reward. Word has spread, and bounty hunters aren't known for waiting for legal niceties. What do you suggest? Nathan inquired. I'll take statements from both of you today. Then I'd recommend lying low here at the ranch until after we've apprehended Fletcher and his accomplices. Once they're in custody and the payroll is secure, I'll formally announce that the charges have been dropped." Relief washed over Gabriella. After days of fear and uncertainty, the prospect of legal exoneration seemed almost too good to be true. "How long will that take?" "A week, perhaps 2, the marshal replied, "assuming the information about the timing of the payroll shipment is accurate." Nathan clapped a hand on Zachary's shoulder. "You're both welcome to stay as long as necessary. Rebecca enjoys the company, and we can always use an extra hand with the horses." The days that followed brought a gradual easing of tension. Zachary's wound healed quickly under Rebecca's care, and Gabriella found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She helped Rebecca with household tasks during the mornings and spent afternoons exploring the property, often in Zachary's company. Their relationship evolved in this period of relative peace. Without the immediate pressure of pursuit, they discovered common interests and complementary temperaments. Gabriella's quick intelligence and dry humor drew smiles from Zachary that transformed his usually serious countenance. In turn, his quiet strength and unwavering integrity earned her deepening respect. One evening, about a week after their arrival at the ranch, they walked together along the creek that bordered the Hallbrook property. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the rippling water. "What will you do when this is over?" Zachary asked, breaking a companionable silence. "When the marshal clears our names," Gabriella considered the question. It was one she had been pondering with increasing frequency. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "My original plan to become a teacher seems inadequate somehow after everything that's happened." "You'd make a fine teacher," Zachary observed. "You have the patience and the intelligence for it." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But I've seen more of the territory now, experienced its dangers and its beauty. I'm not the same person who stepped off that stagecoach in Santa Fe." They paused at a bend in the creek, where a fallen log provided a natural seat. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. "And you?" Gabriella asked. "Will you continue drifting?" Zachary's gaze remained on the distant mountains, their peaks tinged with the last light of day. "That was my intention when I rode into Sierra Vista." He glanced at her. "Plans change." The simple statement carried implications that quickened Gabriella's pulse. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Nathan appeared on horseback, waving to them with evident excitement. "News from the marshal," he called as he dismounted. "They've arrested Fletcher and 2 of his gang trying to ambush the payroll convoy. The 3rd man turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency." His grin widened. "The charges against you both have been officially dropped. It'll be in the Tucson papers tomorrow." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Gabriella laughed, the sound pure and joyous in the evening air. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Zachary, who caught her in a firm embrace, lifting her briefly off her feet. "It's over," she whispered against his shoulder. "Really over." His arms tightened around her before he set her gently down, his expression a complex mixture of relief and something more intense, more personal. "Yes," he agreed softly. "That part is over." Nathan, observing their embrace with a knowing smile, mounted his horse again. "Rebecca's preparing a special dinner to celebrate. Don't be too long, or she'll send the dogs after you." As he rode back toward the ranch house, Gabriella became acutely aware of Zachary's proximity, of the fact that his hand still rested lightly at her waist. She stepped back slightly, suddenly self-conscious. "I should thank you properly," she said, For everything you've done, you risked your life for a complete stranger." "Not a stranger anymore," Zachary pointed out, his voice low. He hesitated, then reached for her left hand, where Emily's ring still rested on her finger. "I think it's time for this to come off." Gabriella nodded, feeling an irrational disappointment as she began to remove the ring. Before she could slip it free, however, Zachary's hand closed over hers again. "Unless," he said carefully, "you might consider wearing it for its intended purpose." Her breath caught in her throat. "Zachary." "I know it's sudden," he continued, his usual confidence giving way to a rare uncertainty. "We've known each other barely 2 weeks, but in that time I've come to care for you in ways I didn't think possible anymore. After Emily died, I believed that part of me was finished." "You've proven otherwise." Gabriella stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "Are you asking me to marry you?" A smile touched his lips, not the brief, restrained expression she had come to know, but something fuller, more genuine. "I believe I am, though I'm making a poor job of it." He took both her hands in his. "Gabriella Vance, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung between them, momentous and transformative. Gabriella searched his face, finding in it the same steadfast character that had drawn her to him from the moment he cut the rope that bound her to Radley's horse. "Yes," she answered simply. "I would." The kiss that followed was unlike their first, not born of desperation or the fear of imminent separation, but of a deep, growing affection and the promise of a shared future. When they finally parted, Zachary's expression held a contentment Gabriella suspected had been absent for many years. "Nathan mentioned there's a small ranch for sale adjoining his property," he said as they began walking back toward the house, hands intertwined. "Good water, decent grazing land, similar to what I had in Wyoming but without the brutal winters. Are you considering buying it?" "I am," he confirmed. "I've been drifting long enough. Time to put down roots again." He glanced at her. "If that would suit you." Gabriella squeezed his hand. "I think it would suit me very well, Mr. Keller." The celebration dinner that evening took on an additional significance when Zachary and Gabriella announced their engagement. Rebecca embraced them both, while Nathan produced his finest bottle of whiskey for a toast. "To new beginnings," he proposed, raising his glass. "And to the courage it takes to seize them." The following week was filled with activity as Zachary negotiated the purchase of the adjacent ranch. The property included a modest house that needed repairs, a barn, and approximately 500 acres of mixed grazing land and timber. With Nathan's assistance, he also acquired a small herd of cattle to start rebuilding what he had lost in Wyoming. Gabriella threw herself into preparations for their new home, working alongside Rebecca to gather household necessities and planning improvements to the ranch house. The two women became fast friends, with Rebecca providing practical advice based on her years as a rancher's wife. "Marriage isn't always easy," she told Gabriella one afternoon as they sorted linens. "Especially out here, where nature can turn against you in an instant. But if you face hardships together, share both burdens and joys, you'll build something stronger than either of you could create alone." The wisdom resonated with Gabriella, who had witnessed firsthand both the harshness of frontier life and the resilience of those who embraced it. Her experiences with Zachary had shown her that they could face danger side by side, each complementing the other's strengths. On a clear autumn morning 3 weeks after their arrival at the Holbrook Ranch, Gabriella and Zachary were married in a simple ceremony in Nathan and Rebecca's parlor. Marshall Davis, passing through on his circuit, performed the service. Rebecca stood as Gabriella's witness, while Nathan stood for Zachary. Gabriella wore a new dress of pale blue, ordered specially from Tucson, with her mother's cameo at her throat, the one possession she had refused to sell when financial necessity had stripped away everything else. Zachary looked almost uncomfortable in a new black suit, though his evident joy overshadowed any sartorial discomfort. As they exchanged vows and rings Emily's band for Gabriella, a new one for Zachary, the journey that had brought them together seemed at once impossible and inevitable. From the terror of that day in Sierra Vista to the promise of a shared life, they had traversed emotional terrain as varied and challenging as the physical landscape around them. After the ceremony, a small celebration followed, with neighboring ranchers joining the Holbrooks in welcoming the newlyweds. As twilight approached, Zachary and Gabriella departed for their own ranch, accompanied by well wishes and the traditional shower of rice. Their new home awaited them, still rough around the edges, but already bearing the marks of their combined efforts. Flowers that Gabriella had planted brightened the front porch, while new glass in the windows reflected the last light of day. Inside, simple but comfortable furniture arranged by Rebecca created a welcoming atmosphere. Zachary lifted Gabriella across the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh even as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Home," she repeated, the word carrying all the weight of what they had found in each other's safety, understanding, and a love neither had expected to discover. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, the journey that had begun with violence and fear culminated in tenderness and passion. Zachary's hands, once used for survival and protection, now traced the contours of Gabriella's body with gentle reverence. She responded with equal fervor, their union a physical expression of the bond that had formed between them amidst danger and hardship. In the years that followed, the Keller ranch prospered under their combined stewardship. Zachary's experience with cattle proved invaluable, while Gabriella's organizational skills and practical intelligence contributed equally to their success. The herd grew, as did their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Their family expanded as well. 18 months after their wedding, Gabriella gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the friend who had once saved Zachary's life. 2 years later, a daughter followed Emily Rebecca, honoring both the past and the present that had made their happiness possible. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Thomas inherited his father's quiet determination and his mother's quick mind, while Emily possessed Gabriella's grace and Zachary's unflinching courage. Life on the frontier remained challenging. Drought threatened their herd one year, while an unseasonable flood damaged fences and outbuildings the next. Through each crisis, they worked side by side, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. The territory around them changed as well. Arizona moved toward statehood, bringing increased settlement and the gradual taming of once lawless areas. Sierra Vista grew from a rough frontier town into a respectable community with a school, several churches, and a legitimate marshal who enforced the law without favor. Occasionally, someone would recognize Zachary as the man who shot Emmett Radley. But as time passed, the incident became more legend than reality, a tale of frontier justice that old-timers told over whiskey at the saloon. For Zachary and Gabriella, it remained a pivotal moment in their shared history, but not one that defined their life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they hosted a gathering at the ranch. The Holbrooks were there, Nathan's beard now entirely gray but his spirit undimmed. Marshall Davis, retired but still straight-backed and keen-eyed, regaled the children with carefully edited stories of his days upholding the law. Thomas and Emily Quinn, who had become cherished extended family, brought their famous apple pies and stayed for 3 days. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit in the yard, music from a fiddle and guitar filled the air. Neighbors and friends danced beneath the stars while children darted among the adults, their laughter a counterpoint to the melodies. Zachary found Gabriella watching from the porch, a smile playing at her lips as Thomas attempted to teach little Emily a simple 2-step. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her against his side. "Happy?" he asked softly. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Completely." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "Do you ever think about that day? In Sierra Vista?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Though it seems like something that happened to different people now." Gabriella nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I was so frightened. Not just of Radley, but of everything, of failing, of being alone in a place that seemed determined to destroy me. And now," she turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had become the center of her world. The years had added lines to his face, silver threads to his hair, but his eyes still held the same steady resolve that had given her courage in her darkest moment. "Now, I know that the territory isn't inherently cruel or kind. It simply is. We make our own way through it, for better or worse." Her smile deepened. "And I've been fortunate enough to make that journey with you." Zachary lowered his head, capturing her lips in a kiss that, even after a decade, still held the power to quicken her pulse and warm her blood. When they parted, the sounds of celebration continued around them, music and laughter, the backdrop to the life they had built together. "I love you, Gabriella," he said, the words a simple truth that needed no embellishment. "And I love you," she replied, equally direct. From tragedy to triumph, from desperation to devotion, their path had been neither straight nor easy. But standing together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, home, family, community, they knew with absolute certainty that every step, however difficult, had led them precisely where they were meant to be.